The commander of a decorated Pacific submarine watched through his periscope as the horizon ignited. He saw the flash, heard the muffled roar through the hull, and felt the surge of a successful strike. He recorded the kill, noted the coordinates, and waited for the medal that would surely follow. He didn't know that the ship he had just sent to the abyss was carrying 2,000 of his own countrymen. They weren't the enemy's ammunition or supplies. They were the very prisoners of war he had been sent to find. In that single, silent pull of a lever, the hunter became an accidental executioner. Deep beneath the surface of the Pacific, the air inside a submarine is recycled and heavy with the scent of diesel and sweat. The crew moves like clockwork, every motion dictated by the rhythm of the hunt. There is a specific kind of pride in a clean hit, a professional satisfaction in seeing a silhouette disappear from the lens. But the Pacific was a graveyard of hidden identities. To the men in the control room, a ship was just a target, a set of variables involving speed, angle, and distance. They followed orders to starve the enemy's supply lines, unaware that the lines they were cutting were made of human lives. Thousands of miles from home, below the deck of a transport ship known as a Maru, there is no light. The air is thick, humid, and smells of rust and desperation. Thousands of men, survivors of the most brutal conditions on land, were packed into these floating iron boxes. They were told they were being moved to safer locations, perhaps to work sites where the conditions would finally improve. They were the forgotten sons of the Allied forces, men who had already endured the unendurable. As they huddled together in the stifling heat, listening to the rhythmic thrum of the engines, they believed the worst was behind them. They didn't know their own brothers in arms were stalking them from the dark water. The strategy of the Pacific theater was as simple as it was ruthless. To win, one had to neutralize every transport vessel flying the enemy's flag. The submarines were the silent predators of the deep, given a mandate to sink anything that moved. But there was a catastrophic oversight, a missing piece of information that turned these hunters into monsters of circumstance. The ships carrying the prisoners carried no markings. There were no Red Cross symbols, no white flags, and no signals to indicate that the cargo was human. To a periscope lens a mile away, a ship full of captives looked identical to a ship full of explosives. In the silence of the submarine's command center, the crew tracked the silhouette of the Maru against the moonlight. They calculated the timing with practiced precision. There was a grim sense of duty in the air. Every ship sent to the bottom was a step closer to the end of the conflict. The order was given, and the steel tubes hissed as the torpedoes were released into the cold current. On the surface, the men in the dark hold of the Maru ship heard nothing until the moment the world began to tear itself apart. The impact of a torpedo against a steel hull is more than a sound. It is a physical force that collapses reality. For the men trapped below, the first sign of their end was the sudden violent tilt of their world. The engines stopped, replaced by the terrifying roar of the ocean rushing into the confined spaces. In the pitch black, there was no room for an organized escape. There were only narrow ladders, locked hatches, and the weight of the water. Above them, the guards faced a choice between their own survival and the lives of those they held captive. History suggests that in the chaos of a sinking ship, the choice made was often the darkest one possible. As the vessel began its final descent, the men inside realized the cruel irony of their situation. They were being killed by the very forces they prayed for every night. The torpedoes that ended their lives were stamped with the seals of their own nations. The metal that pierced the hull was forged in the factories of their homelands. It was a betrayal of circumstance, a cosmic error played out in the freezing waters of the deep. The ocean didn't care about allegiances. It simply filled the lungs and silenced the cries, pulling the Maru ships and their secret cargo into the crushing depths where light never reaches. On the surface, the submarine crew watched through the periscope as the ship slipped beneath the waves. They recorded the success in their logs and perhaps shared a brief moment of triumph. They had no way of knowing that the debris field floating on the water was all that remained of their own comrades. The records of these missions were often kept under layers of bureaucracy, hidden away in archives where the truth could be managed. For decades, the families of the missing were told only that their loved ones had vanished at sea or succumbed to the hardships of the camps. The specific nature of their end was a secret held by the dark waters. The scale of this tragedy is difficult to grasp because it happened in fragments spread across the vastness of the sea. One ship might hold a few hundred men, another might hold thousands. Some estimates suggest that more lives were lost in these accidental sinkings than in some of Maru's most famous land battles of the Pacific. It was a systematic failure of intelligence and a grim necessity of total war. The commanders on both sides knew the risks, yet the ships remained unmarked. The prisoners remained a hidden commodity, moved across the chessboard of the ocean without a voice and without a shield. There are stories of those who managed to claw their way out of the sinking hulls, only to find themselves in a different kind of nightmare. Surrounded by miles of open water, with no lifeboats and no hope of rescue, they drifted. Some were picked up by the very submarines that had sunk them, leading to a moment of horrific realization for the rescuers. Imagine the face of a sailor as he pulls a drowning man from the water, only to realize the man is wearing the same uniform as he is. The psychological weight of that discovery is a burden many carried for the rest of their lives, a shadow that no metal could ever brighten. The Maru ships became known as Hell Ships, not just because of the conditions on board, but because of the specialized purgatory they represented. They were vessels of transition, moving men from the known world into a void of uncertainty. The tragedy lies in the anonymity of the victims. Because the ships were sunk in deep water, often far from any land, there were few witnesses. The ocean is an efficient eraser of evidence. It swallows the steel, the wood, and the bone, leaving only the ripples on the surface that vanish in minutes. The Maru ships became ghosts long before they ever touched the bottom. The silence surrounding these events was not just a result of the war's chaos, but of a lingering discomfort. How does a nation mourn those it accidentally killed? How does a military admit that its most effective weapon was also its most tragic? The answers were often found in the absence of information. In the years following the conflict, many details were slowly pieced together by historians and survivors who refused to let the memory of their comrades be washed away. They spoke of the sounds of the hull buckling, the desperate scramble in the dark, and the haunting sight of friendly planes circling above, unaware that the men waving frantically from the water were their own. The mystery of the Maru ships is not just a question of numbers or dates. It is a question of the human cost of strategic silence. The decision to keep these ships unmarked was a calculated move in a high-stakes game where human lives were the currency. The tragedy was not just the sinking itself, but the environment of secrecy that allowed it to happen again and again. Each incident was a repeat of the last, a cycle of accidental destruction that defined the maritime war. Even today, the wrecks of these ships lie scattered across the ocean floor, serving as steel tombs for thousands. They are silent monuments to a conflict that saw the boundaries of morality pushed to their limits. Divers who have visited some of these sites speak of a heavy stillness, a sense of a story left unfinished. The items found in the silt, a rusted mess kit, a wedding ring, a button from a uniform, are the only voices left to tell of the men who were lost. They speak of lives interrupted by a mistake that was as lethal as any intentional act of malice. The dark history of the Maru ships is a reminder that in the fog of war, the greatest danger doesn't always come from the enemy you face. Sometimes it comes from the friend who cannot see you. It is a story of shadows and missed signals, of a vast blue graveyard where the truth is buried under miles of water. The ocean remains indifferent to the tragedies it holds, but the memory of the Hell Ships continues to ripple through time, a haunting echo of the price paid for victory. As we look back at the records, we are left with more questions than answers. Was there a moment when the truth could have been told? Could a single mark on a hull have saved 10,000 lives? The theories remain debated, the blame remains scattered, and the survivors remain few. The tragedy of the Maru ships is a puzzle with missing pieces, a narrative where the heroes and the victims are often the same people. It is a testament to the chaos of the human condition and the terrifying power of the unknown. The Pacific still hides many secrets. The currents move over the remains of the Maru ships, slowly turning steel back into earth. But for those who know where to look, the ghosts of these vessels are still there, navigating the currents of history. They remind us that the cost of silence is often higher than the cost of the loudest explosion. They are the ghost ships of the Pacific, eternally sailing through the dark, carrying the weight of a tragedy that was never supposed to happen, but can never be forgotten. The story ends not with a resolution, but with a lingering sense of the profound irony that defines the Maru ships. It is the image of a submarine slipping away into the night, its crew believing they have done their duty, while behind them, the ocean closes over the heads of the very men they were fighting to bring home. It is a darkness that no light can fully penetrate, a mystery that stays locked in the iron hulls at the bottom of the world. The Maru ships were not just casualties of war, they were the casualties of a world that lost sight of its own in the pursuit of an end. In the final accounting, the Maru ships stand as a warning about the fragility of identity in the face of conflict. When a man is reduced to a silhouette, when a ship is reduced to a target, the human element is the first thing to drown. The tragedy of the Allied POWs on the Maru ships is a story of men caught between two fires, with nowhere to run and no way to call for help. It is the ultimate dark thriller, played out in the silence of the deep, where the only witness was the sea itself. And the sea, as it always does, keeps its secrets well. As we reflect on the thousands who remain in those underwater tombs, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that war creates monsters out of mistakes. The men who fired the torpedoes were not villains, and the men in the holds were not meant to be victims of their own side. Yet, the outcome was the same. The Pacific became a vault of lost potential, a place where the echoes of the Maru ships still resonate for those willing to listen to the silence. The story of the ghost ships is a reminder that even in the most clearly defined battles, the shadows are always deeper than they appear. In those final moments, as the hull creaked and the pressure mounted, there was no distinction between friend and foe. There was only the cold, the dark, and the weight of the water. The Maru ships serve as a chilling chapter of the Great War, a series of events where the lines between savior and executioner were blurred by the salt and the shadows. We may never know the full extent of what lies at the bottom, but we know that the price of those mistakes is etched forever into the history of the deep.